And we're back on a Tuesday morning in the car, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for taking this early Tuesday morning drive with me here in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Now, yesterday was Memorial Day, and I had an idea that maybe I was going to do a lighthearted Memorial Day episode, because certainly I don't like seeing people arguing over what, like the difference between Veterans Day and Memorial Day. I'm not dismissing the fact that the holidays aren't the same, but if, for example, somebody talks about a famous veteran that they knew who, let's just say, was only wounded or simply served, I like the idea of celebrating veterans, even on Memorial Day, even though that's not technically what it's for. And then there's the argument, what if a person took an injury in combat and then they died, but they didn't actually die in battle? It's all really negative, and I'm not on board with the arguing of it. So I had two uncles who were really badly wounded in World War II. They came home. One of them lived a normal life. The other one, his injuries pretty much ruined his life. And I don't want to get into fights with people about, misappropriating the holiday or not. Because I'm not interested in that. So I was going to do an episode yesterday, keeping it lighthearted. Not that Memorial Day is lighthearted, but you think about the amount of famous sporting events that take place and have taken place on Memorial Day. People go about their regular lives. You remember family, and incorrectly perhaps, but I remember family who served on Memorial Day. I understand it's not all about beer and barbecues. It is a day of remembrance. I accept, I'm sure there were moments where I was just looking forward to going to a barbecue or somebody's house to have fun. But as an older person, as somebody who is a lot older than my two uncles, for example, who were wounded, it does give me pause. There's a little bit of a sense of, you have to kind of moderate. Don't get so crazy. Don't go so wacky if you happen to be gathering with friends. Just keep in mind why this day exists. But there is a tradition of baseball and famous games, and a time in my life when I was really not having a good time. And the joke is that lasted for about 3.5 decades. But for purposes of this particular episode and this particular conversation, I grew up a diehard New York Yankees fan. Like, I was a sick, crazed fan from the time I was 13. I was the sort of fan who tried to watch every pitch of every game. And I was the sort of lunatic who was staying up till 2 a.m. to watch the team on the West Coast when the franchise had their single worst season historically in 1990. I was 16, and the team lost 95 games. And the thing is, this is something I do believe, and maybe this is a contrarian view, because if you are under 40, I'm not going to take shots at millennials and, back in my day, and I'll put my grandpa cap on, because I'm certainly not a grandpa. I mean, theoretically I could be. I'm not. But I believe when it comes to sports fandom, if your team has always been good, if they have always been a title contender, in this instance, it doesn't matter. This is not a baseball specific point. But if your team has always been a representable organization, as far as you go into spring training, you go into training camp if it's football, but you go in thinking that you have at least a shot to be a playoff team, a championship winning team. If you have never suffered with a shit-ass team, and this is where, to make jokes, local Jets and Mets fans, even young Jets and Mets fans, have known sports suffering. They have lived it. The joke was, I think it was 2018, when Game of Thrones ended. I realize it's a TV reference, but when Game of Thrones ended, there were millions of people who were bitterly disappointed by how the series ended. And there was this incredible meme. It was a picture at the end of the show, and on the top it said, "Oh, you're sad about the end of Game of Thrones? And then at the bottom, it was Met fans suffering because presumably their team has lost. And it just said, you're a bunch of amateurs. Because you don't know, and I don't believe you can truly be a fan unless you have been with the team, if you have still been a diehard fan, keeping up with all the latest news, and who are we calling up from the minors, and that's not really a prospect. It doesn't matter that he's 22. He's like, if you've never done that, if you've never lived that, you are not the kind of fan that I was. And it doesn't make me better, but I don't think you can fully appreciate when a team gets great if you have not been there for all of the S-H-I-T, as my mom would say. She never would say the word. She would spell it out as if my younger self couldn't figure out, oh, she's saying the word shit. She just doesn't want to say it out loud to her little apple-cheeked son. So I suffered as the Yankees went downhill in the late 80s. Had some injuries, guys got older. George Steinbrenner made a series of very poor personnel decisions. You know, people get on Jerry Jones because maybe he's not, you know, the greatest GM in the history of football. Compared to Jerry Jones, George Steinbrenner was like one of the worst executives ever. He was terrible. At least Jerry Jones understands football. George Steinbrenner never really had that great of a grasp of baseball. He knew big names, he knew stats, but he couldn't look behind the numbers and beneath the numbers, and that's why he kept making mistakes. So as a young fan, a pessimistic kid, I started to think the Yankees were always going to be a lousy team. You know, during the 80s, when I started to become a big fan, they finished second a number of times. They led in 1987, 1988, especially 87. They led almost, you know, the first 3 quarters of the season, and they just kind of gassed out. And as I like to point out, but for those new to the channel, if you don't know the kind of history, there didn't used to be all these layers of playoffs. No, there weren't these layers of playoffs back then. You either won your division or you're on the golf course the next day. Those were your options. The team was awful. Every year, the season is over in April. So I remember I'm in 11th grade when the 1991 baseball season started, and they made a couple of moves, and they seemed to have some young players that certain people were excited about, but you always have to moderate it, especially when a team is terrible and when an organization is in tatters. This Yankee organization, this is not your brothers or your New York Yankees. The organization was a fucking laughingstock. George Steinbrenner had been thrown out of the sport for some real terrible bullshit that he pulled to try to discredit his star player, Dave Winfield, who he had a feud with going back to when Winfield signed. The issue wasn't Winfield. It was the fact that Steinbrenner's lawyer got screwed, and he signed a deal and told George that this deal is okay, and George ended up paying way more than he was supposed to. Winfield's lawyer really did a number on those guys, and George, the kind of personality, he held it against Big Dave himself, even though it wasn't Dave, it was the lawyer. The lawyer put some kind of clever wording in there. So anyway, Steinbrenner was thrown out of the sport. The Yanks lose 95 games. And they seem to be on the right track as far as there were a number of young players that people were excited about. But where I was going with that before is when you have nothing to latch onto, you will sometimes in sports overinflate someone's future prospects, and that's why they call them prospects, because you don't know what it's just a prospect. It is a prospective big player in the future, and maybe they suck. When there were some young pitchers that other scouts said, the Yanks have got some big young arms, the future is bright, Yankee fans. There was a lot of this kind of talk on ESPN, and I thought they were just full of shit. They also were talking about a young outfielder named Bernie Williams. I didn't like the name, but they were talking about a young outfielder named Bernie Williams, and he said, they're probably not going to be that good this year, but there is hope. At least they're drafting better. They've signed some good young players in the international market, et cetera, et cetera. But the 1991 season started poorly. They started poorly, and after 38 games, I think they were 14-24. They just weren't playing well. And there were a lot of older veterans who hadn't been that good to begin with, pitchers such as Tim Leary, who had been terrific with the Dodgers. And it was just a bizarre mix of veterans and young players who probably had already come close to hitting their potential. And this is a kind of a nuance point for real baseball fans. There were a lot of good players who should not have been starters. I can name at least 5 or 6 people from the 1991 Yankees roster who, if you took them and their exact skill sets and put them on the 96 to 2000, the kind of Joe Torre World Series winning teams, they would have been useful players. Jesse Barfield would have been a phenomenal fourth outfielder, and Jesse could hit the hell out of left-handed pitching. He also maybe had the best outfield arm that I've ever seen. The guy was throwing frozen ropes 100 miles an hour, 300 feet from the outfield. But Jesse, sorry to say, he should not have been hitting cleanup or hitting 5th or 6th. He was no longer really an everyday player. And the thing is, when your team sucks, it's not that you don't have any good players. It's that you don't have any star players, and your farm system doesn't seem to be producing any star players. So they start awful, and it doesn't look like you're even going to have a season in 91, but I am watching every pitch of every game. I'm hoping, I'm praying. I don't have anything else in my life. Again, this is ridiculous. I didn't know. I had it so good, but woe is me all the time. I didn't have that many friends, no social life, world's smallest violin. I have very little sympathy for my 17-year-old self. That kid created a lot of his own problems, but they started to play better. They had a road trip to Cleveland and Baltimore sometime in, I guess it was the middle of May. And they did really well. I want to say they won their last 4 on the trip. They took, I think they swept Cleveland. Oh, no, they didn't. But they won. They swept Baltimore in Baltimore is what it was. And that was really a shock. And they came home for a 12-game homestand on a 4-game winning streak. So I think they got to, and it's still pathetic because you look at the Yankees today, they're 33-20. They're on pace for 100 wins again. And they didn't even start this season that well. But Judge is ridiculous. The guy is so good. That's like he just keeps getting better. So the team was showing signs of life as we kind of approached Memorial Day 1991. So they win the last 4 games of their road trip, including a couple of tough games and an extra inning victory in Baltimore. So they come home to face the first place Boston Red Sox. And the Red Sox were pretty good that year, but they weren't great. And for whatever reason, the Yankees kind of had their number. Again, there's this stuff that happens in baseball. The great Yankee teams of the late 70s, for whatever reason, they had trouble with the Seattle Mariners, who sucked. They were like a 100-loss team, and the Yanks would go to Seattle, and it was like a house of horrors. They just couldn't win there. You got like a 103-win Yankees team and a 102-loss Seattle team, and the Seattle used to beat them like a tin drum. Baseball doesn't always make sense. So the Yanks came home to a 12-game homestand, looking ahead to Memorial Day, and there was at least a little bit of signs of life because the road trip, it wasn't just that they ended with wins, it's that they won a bunch of games there that they had been losing up to that point. So Memorial Day Monday, I'm home from school, and at the MSG network back then, and I'm ready to watch a baseball game. And let's have a big game, and let's have a 5-game winning streak. Let's get something going. Let me dream for a little bit. Maybe we'll have a turnaround, and this won't be a season where we lose 100 games again. But there are certain players, and this is unfortunate because this guy who I'm going to mention, I really like this guy. I thought he was a terrific pitching coach. Mostly, during the Torre era, but also the Girardi era. So, again, when your organization stinks, you have these kind of high draft picks, and you have big hopes, big dreams that your high draft picks are going to turn into stars. That's the whole point of drafting, is that you're not just getting random people, you're trying to draft future all-stars. So starting for the Yankees on Memorial Day 1991 against the Boston Red Sox was Dave Island. As I said, it was a really good pitching coach. And Dave Island, I believe, had been a first-round pick and a big prospect with the Yankees. But by this point in time, it was clear that he wasn't going to make it as, even a number 5 starter in the major leagues. And I was already so negative when it's like, oh, Island's pitching. Okay, well, we're dead. We can't possibly win this game. Now, Don Mattingly was on the roster, and this is really sad. Donnie was not even 30. He hadn't even turned 30 yet. He was still 29. Oh, no. He would have just turned 30 within, like 3 weeks. So he's still a very young man. I mean, Aaron Judge is turning 33 this year. I think he was born in 92. But by the time Mattingly was 28, he was already past it. His back was just bad, and he couldn't torque into the ball the way that he did as a younger player when he was just ripping everything up. Dave Eiland went out there, and he got hit really hard, and the Yankees fell behind 5-0. Now, the previous year, they had very few what you would call comeback victories. It doesn't mean that if it was 1-0 in the first inning, they were guaranteed to lose. But they were a lousy team, and they didn't have a big offense. They had guys who could play, but you have Steve Balboni hitting cleanup. My dad used to always say we love Steve Balboni. He was great with the Royals, but the Yankees before and after, my dad's quote or his saying was, if Steve Balboni is hitting cleanup, you're not serious. You're not you're not a serious team, because he can't be hitting cleanup. If that's your cleanup hitter, you got a lot of problems. Yeah, and they did. The Yanks had a lot of problems. But in this case, it's the fact that you had the Jesse Barfields of the world against a right-hand pitcher occasionally hitting cleanups. He's a 230 hitter who doesn't draw any walks. Yes, he can hit the ball 450 feet, but he doesn't do it enough. If Jesse had walked more, he would have still been a more useful player. So they're down 5-0 early, and I'm mentally checking. I'm like, this is what a depressing, this is awful, yada, yada, yada. Woe is me, I don't have any friends. It's all negative. Unfortunately, when your sports team sucks, it's easy for you to act like the rest of your life is all a dumpster fire. It really isn't. But that's what it feels like. Everything's going wrong. I mean, look at it this way. When the Knicks lost game 2, when the Knicks lost game 1 of the playoffs against the Pacers, the Eastern Conference Finals, the joke was that Timothy Chalamet, who was a legitimately lifelong diehard Knicks fan, people are like, what is he so upset about? He's going home with Kylie Jenner, whatever it is. He's a fucking fan. That's why he's upset. The fact that he's got a hot girlfriend, it doesn't exactly, well, now I'm fine. I'm not really a fan because I have come on. If you don't understand sports fandom, what I just said doesn't make sense. But it's true. It's real. All seems bad when your team loses, especially in something as serious as the Eastern Conference Finals, where you had a 20-point lead, a 14-point lead with 3 minutes left. And according to statistics, you were 99.7% to win. That's pretty fucking bad right there. The Yanks started to come back, though, in that game. They started to come back. Eiland was knocked out of the game, and Mattingly actually hurt his thumb, so he was out of the game. He had his thumb wrapped up. He slid into second base, and he kind of jammed his thumb. Jesse Barfield hit a solo homer. Mel Hall hit a homer. Then Jesse Barfield hit another homer, and Barfield's second homer is one of the longest home runs ever hit in the old configuration, where it was 430 feet to left center. Jesse hit an absolute bomb. So it was 5-3. And to the credit of the Yankee bullpen, that was one thing that particular Yankees team had, was a really solid bullpen. They had about 6 top-end guys. The only all-star who had a kind of a great career, well, Steve Howe had a good career, but he had a lot of drug problems. Steve Farr. Steve Farr was another one of those guys. He was like a Jeff Nelson, only he was better. Prime Steve Farr was definitely better than Jeff Nelson. It was just the wrong time for that sort of pitcher. So they got it to 5-3. And you're going to the bottom of the 9th. And you're down 2 runs. And if you look at the metrics, statistically, we're not winning this game. We're going to go out easy in the 9th inning, come back tomorrow, try again. We're not winning this game. Well, what history tells us, and what ended up happening, is that the Yankees' first hitter, a big prospect who never panned out, Hensley Mullins. This is the kind of guy that was buzzed about for a couple of years. He was International League Player of the Year in the minors, but he just couldn't get it. He just wasn't good at the major league level. He got a hit. And then another big prospect who the previous year we thought was going to be a superstar, he came up at the same time as David Justice, and there were people actually wondering who's going to be better, David Justice or Kevin Moss. Boy, I wish the answer to that had been Kevin Moss. But by 91, it was clear Kevin Moss was a very one-dimensional player. He wasn't as good of a first baseman as he should have been. He couldn't run. Beautiful swing. He could hit the ball out of the ballpark, but he did not make consistently strong contact. And we knew that this guy is just not that good. And it's unfortunate because he looks the part. He looks like he should be a Yankee great with that kind of lantern-jawed look of as my dad's old friend and partner, Hal Schulman, used to say, hey, they comparing this guy to Lucius. He don't look nothing like Gehrig, and he can't fucking hit. This is great. Conversations from 34 years ago in Midtown Manhattan. But Kevin Moss got on base. So now we got the potential winning run at the plate. You know, people always say it'll bring the potential winning run to the plate. So now you've got a guy who I was a fan of, who is now a very notorious figure, and I'm not going to explain why, Mel Hall, or the Notorious M.H.J. if you prefer, Melvin Hall Jr., his full name. So Mel Hall was a guy who cared. He was a hard-nosed player, but he was just a bad guy. And there was that documentary that aired on NBC networks, at Peacock in particular, last year, about the disastrous 1990 season. And Mel Hall, the fact that he played a central role in the organization, you could say, is problematic at best, but at that point he had not been accused of any crimes. Like, he was just a regular guy who seemed like, okay, he's a hard-nosed player, et cetera, et cetera. So Mel Hall was a good baseball player. He did, you hate to say it, he played the game the right way. He hustled. And he was the sort of guy that, you know, would blow out his hamstring from trying to stretch for a double. He played baseball. He gave it what he had. And he had good power. And he was a left-handed pull hitter. And we all know, whether it's now, whether it's then, Yankee Stadium is tailored to a left-handed pull hitter. And Hall, every time he came up in Yankee Stadium, especially against a righty, you always thought this guy could hit the ball out of the ballpark. So he didn't strike out that much. He had a really sweet line drive left-handed swing. And the Red Sox pitcher that day was a guy named Jeff Reardon, who I don't know if Reardon made the Hall of Fame, but if he didn't, he was very close. He was maybe a half a notch below Lee Smith, who is in the Hall of Fame. But by this point in time, the thunder was gone from Reardon's fastball. Reardon's kind of glory days with the old Montreal Expos, he's throwing 100 miles an hour. He was great. You know, he won the Rolaids Relief Man and the Fireman of the Year and all that. But I had a sense Hall was going to hit one out. We're actually going to win this fucking game. I can't believe it. Mel's going to hit a home run. Now, I was as pessimistic as any kid, but I was convinced in this moment, Mel's going to hit one out of the ballpark. We're going to win this game. And I started getting excited. Now, usually I would get excited and something bad would happen. Because 1990, they would lose this game. The guy would hit into a double play, game's over. But on a 2-2 pitch, Jeff Reardon threw a changeup, and Mel Hall was ready for it. It's almost as if Reardon was tipping his pitches, and Mel sat back and treated it like it was batting practice. And he hit a frozen rope. He hit a missile into the mezzanine. Now, if you could imagine the configuration of the old stadium, old Yankee Stadium, you almost can't hit a ball hard enough to get it into the mezzanine. You'd have to hit it on a line where it stays at a certain elevation for at least 330 feet. It's almost impossible. But Mel hit it that hard. It didn't even have time to hook foul. And many Yankee fans, younger fans, remember and know of John Sterling's kind of iconic the stupid home run calls, but at the end of the game, the Yankees win, This game was the first time he did anything like that. Hall hit this ball into the mezzanine, a 3-run walk-off homer. The Yankees win 6-5. It wasn't that great of a crowd because the team was terrible, but there probably were 35,000 people. Memorial Day, yes, we remember our fallen, if we had relatives, et cetera, but you go to the game and you get into it, you get enveloped, you get absorbed, and you, at least temporarily, you forget that it's a Memorial Day. So the place is going nuts. Everybody's high-fiving, jumping for joy. If you didn't know, you might think this was a playoff game. That's how excited. It was a walk-off. And this Yankee team had not had that many really exciting finishes to baseball games because they mostly had sucked. It all comes back to the fact that when the team is good, you expect great things. And when the team is terrible, you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Oh, God, we're just going to lose. You know what? I'm being ridiculous. He's not hitting a home run. He's going to hit a tapper back to them. They're going to get a triple play, something stupid like that, right? But they won the game 6-5. And they went ahead and had a huge homestand, and they had another game with a walk-off home run a number of days later. They ended up going 8-4 on the homestand. And this dog team which had been 14-24, 13-23, they actually were over 500 in the second half. And for the briefest of moments, it appeared they were going to make a challenge for the division titles. The Red Sox really kind of fell apart a little bit there. And the Blue Jays were in first place in the second half, but they didn't look that good. And it seemed that there may have been an angle where if the Yankees' young players were as good as we were told they might be, because we brought up a couple of pitchers, they look good. Scott Kamenecki, Wade Taylor, Jeff Johnson. Jeff Johnson, they thought, was going to be what Andy Pettitte ended up becoming. Didn't happen. Wade Taylor was a kid with a huge fastball, big looping curve. Didn't end up having much of a career. Scott Kamenecki had a good career. I mean, he was like a number 4 starter after he left the Yankees. He was good. He was a good pitcher. But and Bernie Williams made his major league debut in July. And he wasn't ready, but we could see the skill sets. Okay, he's a switch hitter with power from both sides of the plate. Looks like a hell of an outfielder. Throw the ball. All right, maybe we got something. So they springboarded from this moment, this out of nowhere bolt from the blue, Mel Hall walk-off home run. They played to a 31-20 record over a 50-game stretch in that season before completely falling apart in August and September. But baseball has a way, seemingly, where it almost feels like, if you believe in such things, it was just the Yankees' time to turn it around. Regardless of the fact that Steinbrenner was temporarily out of the sport and they were just running out a very subpar lineup. It was time for them to get a couple of breaks because the organization had gotten a lot of bad breaks, bad decision making, but a lot of bad breaks since the early 1980s. And the playoff structure just killed them. They would have made the postseason at least 4 times in the decade under the current structure. And they're on a golf course the day after the season ended. So with Bernie making his debut and the idea that at least there's something, maybe these young players aren't going to end up being anything special, but at least the organization is going about it the right way. They're not overspending on aging free agent sluggers. And I love Jack Clark, but that was the kind of move that really hurt the franchise. They needed pitching. They didn't need another 30 home run guy who was going to strike out 170 times. They just didn't need him. The Yankees drafted Derek Jeter in the next draft. They should not have been able to get Derek Jeter. The fact that Derek Jeter was still on the board when the Yankees selected, I think, 6th, it can only be explained. The baseball gods decided it was time for this once great franchise. It was time for the come up. You know, they've been a dog team for too long. And they got Jeter in the 92 draft. The 91 team ended up losing 91 games. Let me tell you something. If you're over 500 in the second half, you have no business losing 91 games. The team quit on the manager, Stump Merrill, who's not a very good manager. Great name, but not a good manager. They almost fired Buck Showalter. That would have been not a good move by Steinbrenner. Gene Michael had to basically bully George. Are you fucking stupid? He didn't say fucking stupid. You can't let Showalter go. This is the best organizational guy you've got. Oh, sorry. Tell him he's the manager. You know, whatever the conversation was, something like that. But by 93, they were a winning team. And they came this close to winning the American League East in 93. The young players started to get it. And they were getting free agents, guys like Mike Gallego and Spike Owen, complementary pieces, not centerpiece type players. The farm system began to cook. They began drafting more effectively. The scouting improved. And by 1994, they ran away with the American League East until the strike. So as much as it seemed bleak, as I watched that game, Memorial Day 1991, we didn't realize a new Yankee dynasty was just around the corner. We simply had to be patient. We had to go through another year, and then the next year was a bitter disappointment because 92 they started strong and we thought we're going to be competitive all year. They kind of crapped out, still pretty early in the season. But that's the way it goes. That's baseball. And I am grateful that I was pretty much born into diehard Yankee fandom. But I'm also grateful that I got to see the team go from the dregs to the penthouse in not that much time. You think about how lousy they were in 1990, and then by 93, they're neck and neck with a terrific two-time, back-to-back World Series winning Toronto Blue Jays team. Doesn't take that long in baseball. You just need a couple of slots where your organization produces a star player instead of, no offense, Andy Stankiewicz, Sam Militello, Jeff Johnson, Wade Taylor, when your organization produces an Andy Pettitte instead, and a Mariano Rivera, and a Bernie Williams, and a Derek Jeter, and a Jorge Posada. That core four is really a core five. You got to throw Bernie in there. I don't know why it wasn't considered core five, maybe because Bernie was older, but that's how they did it. They made good trades, and they made good free agent signings, but they did it by having drafted well and young players not simply becoming major leaguers, but turning into all-stars. And before you knew it, here we are all these years later. They've had winning seasons every year since 1993. I mean, you're not supposed to be able to do that. I don't care how much money you spend. They've had down years, but they've had down years within normal parameters where they won 84, 85, 86 games. They didn't win 100 games. But they have been competitive every year. And fans under 40 who always pissed off, and they're on the message boards, got to trade this guy, got to trade that guy. Hal needs to sell the team. This is disgusting. You know what? I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it because you're too young to have seen them lose 95 games. You're too young to have stayed up until 2:15 a.m. when the team is on the West Coast watching an extra inning game when they are already 21 games out of first. You haven't done that. You got to get a little perspective. You have no clue how good you've had it, that at least you have a competitive team every single year. But on this day, May 27, 1991, a bolt of lightning, a flash of genius, a harbinger of good things to come, the Notorious M.H.J's 3-run walk-off home run to beat the hated Boston Red Sox on this day, 1991. This has been episode 522 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Tuesday morning here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.